let's talk about the races for a little bit because this is a conversation that John and I have had on this show before. The graded stakes calendar. There's 429 graded stakes in America in 2024. We have half the foal crop that we had 20 years ago. We have short fields. The average field size in America is just over 7, which is abysmal. How can we possibly justify having this many graded stakes? And then the second part to that question is, how can the Graded Stakes Committee possibly justify having zero races downgraded in Kentucky in 2024? To me, that's laughable. Tink, your thoughts?
Yes, well, this is an issue that I've had an interest in and published opinions on in the past, and I agree. I share your outrage. There's an irony to the front page. I believe it's the front page or the home page of TOBA, the Thoroughbred Owners and Breeders Association, which is that they quote a quote that I've used myself previously a couple of times. They quote the previous one-time editor of the Blood Horse, Kent Hollingsworth, who said, and I'm going to read it, "Why bother? Why try to remember which race is better than or inferior to another? Because to improve the breed, to upgrade a broodmare band, to select a stallion, to understand a catalog page, to evaluate a family, one must be able to recognize racing class." Now, Hollingsworth wrote that January 21st, 1972, a little over 50 years ago. And in 73, when the system that we are grappling with today was introduced, there were a total of 351 graded races, 63 of which were grade 1. In 2019, there were 445, 100 of which were grade 1. Mm-hmm. In 1973, there were 26,800 registered foals. In 2019, there were 20,400 foals. So a 26% increase in graded races, a 58% increase in grade 1 races, while the foal crop declined 23%. That really tells you all you need to know about who these decisions are benefiting. Are they really benefiting owners and breeders who would like information that can help them to make intelligent decisions? I mean, certainly not the way they once did. It's promiscuous, the number of graded races. And let me just go off on a tangent here, and then I'd like to hear more of the two of your thoughts. I have long been particularly outraged by the fact that 3-year-old Derby, so-called prep races, would be given grade 1 status. It is absolutely absurd. This year, coming up in a month or so, on March 30th, the Arkansas Derby and Florida Derby will both be run. And on April 6th, a week later, the Bluegrass will be run at Keeneland. All 3 of those are grade 1 races. And all 3 of them are run within a week of one another, 2 on one day. And this is literally, there's no hyperbole here. This is the opposite of what was originally intended by those who create, like Kent Hollingsworth, who created the pattern and graded race paradigm. They wanted the best horses to be funneled into the grade 1 races so that owners and breeders and fans and everyone else could actually see the best, compete with the best. This is the opposite. This is a fracturing of the best 3-year-old male horses. And it's done intentionally because it is a huge catalyst for why there are so many horses that are retired early. They have the grade ones under their belt. And even if they fail in the Triple Crown races or get hurt on the road to it, they've got what they need to make their owners and the stud farms a lot of money. It's a huge problem.
And ironically enough, I say that, tongue in cheek, the members of the TOBA who are on the graded stakes committee are also breeders. Go figure. And Joe mentioned before that, that none of the races in their backyard were downgraded, which again is silly and ridiculous. And if it was any other industry, they would be laughable. Tink, you mentioned, that when horses, once they punch their ticket, my term, and they win a grade 2 or a grade 1, they're, automatically considered as a stallion prospect in Kentucky, almost regardless of what they do thereafter. And when you look at the top stallions that were freshman sires, first year sires in 2023, none of them ran more than 13 times in their career. Corniche ran 4, Cyberknife ran 13, Epicenter 11, Flightline 6, Jack Christopher 6, Life is Good 12, Olympiad 13, Early Voting, the Preakness winner 6, and Golden Pal 13. So it's twofold to me. It's one is, what do those horses all have in common? Well, that they're all grade 1 winners, or Triple Crown winners, and that's what Triple Crown race, winners. So that's one thing. The other is they don't want to ruin. They being the owners don't want to ruin the resume of these horses by running them at 4 and 5, where they could potentially stub their toe and not be worth as much. And quite frankly, they're worth more as a stallion prospect by the end of their 3-year-old year than they are at 4 and 5, which again is counterintuitive to us trying to breed sounder horses that can run more and run further into their careers. So it's really it's a convergence of all of these factors that are weakening in my opinion, the ability for these horses to stay sound.
Yes, those numbers are excellent, John, and and they do help to illuminate the problem. I agree with you completely. But we are now talking about an issue that it's extremely difficult to imagine how the problem might be resolved or the trajectory might be reversed, because as long as big money owners, and of course there are a lot of people and entities involved in this who have been profiting from it, consigners, agents, trainers, everyone, and I'm not singling anyone out. I'm saying everyone in the industry, is at least partly responsible. Everyone involved in that, in the breeding and selling part of the game, is at least partly responsible for how this situation has developed. As long as there's a market for it, as long as owners do not, or buyers, I should say, do not emphasize the need for a stallion to have proven that he was a sound racehorse, then why should they? It's much easier, in the same way that, and I'm not trying to disparage, any whole aspect or of the game, but think about 2-year-old consigners. There are a lot of reasons that an argument could be made that the breeze up sales, the 2-year-old and training sales, are not helpful in terms of breeding better horses, because they are getting young horses to run as fast as they can over a very short distance, and people pay a lot of money for them. And it's the same situation. If people want to pay a lot of money for those horses, it's not so easy to blame the sellers. What do they're
Yeah,
Yep.
you got to give the public what they want. If that's what they want, then it's going to be encouraged to continue to breed and develop those type of horses. I actually had somebody. We have Hades who's on the Kentucky Derby campaign, and I actually had somebody reach out to me and say, it's great that you have a horse on the campaign, but you know that a lot of people are going to be against you. And I said, yeah, I know. It's my association with Joe, Bianca. That's why, obviously. But because we have a gelding that is on the campaign, nobody can benefit from that other than the people who bred the horse and have siblings and the mother, the dam. For the most part, the general industry is not going to benefit if Hades wins the Kentucky Derby. And I never thought of it in quite so terms, that there's an industry within the industry that is rooting for and against certain bloodlines to make it through to the next level, primarily, based on the fact of whether or not they can reproduce. And shame on me for being that naive, but I just never thought of it that way.
Well, John, it's sorry, go ahead, Ted.
No, go on, Joe.
Well, I was just going to say it's gotten to the point where, racing is almost an afterthought. Racing is beside the point. Mm-hmm. Racing is a necessary evil in order to have enough top performances to get a horse to the stallion shed. I think about it like this. A lot of people complain about the one and done in college basketball.
Great example.
Guys come and they are, highly touted freshmen at Kentucky or Duke or whatever, and they have a great freshman season and they're off to the NBA. And you don't really get to build the programs and the rivalries the way that it used to be in the 70s and 80s. There's a parallel to that in racing, except it's as if it would be more like one and done. The guys go to Kentucky for a year and then they retire. Right. And then they're done. And you never see them play basketball again. That would be the more apt analogy. So
wasn't that Sean Kemp?
Sean Kemp might have had as many babies as Inner Mischief, actually. But that's the thing. And it's like, there's really no remedy to it unless you had some kind of unifying body or some kind of regulator come in and say, listen, you don't get to have a stallion unless they run a certain amount of times, unless they won a certain amount of races. Like, that's obviously never going to happen, but that's the only kind of way that you're going to actually be able to address this problem. The other potential remedy that people say is throw more money at the races, make the purses bigger. I don't think you can make the purses big enough to compete with the stallion shed. It's just not realistic. And one of those races that's gotten a huge purse, infusion in the last handful of years is the Saudi Cup. And we had that on Saturday. It was a really, I love the winner. I love Senior Buscador. I'm a big fan of his, big fan of the connections who do things the right way, I think. But that race combined with the Dubai World Cup, Tank, I think has done so much to kind of destroy the American handicap race calendar. Like, we've gotten to the point now where basically half of the American graded stake handicap races, graded stakes races, the ones that used to have real prestige, like the Stephen Foster and the Met Mile, which still has a little bit of clout, they're irrelevant. They're irrelevant now because who wants to go run in the Saudi Cup, run in the Dubai World Cup, and come back and run another month or two in America? The Big Cap. The Big Cap used to be one of the biggest races, most important races in American history. And now it's a complete afterthought. Could you tell me when the Big Cap is? I couldn't tell you what weekend it is. I mean, what are your thoughts overall about the Saudi Cup and just the way it's altered the landscape of American handicap racing?
Very good points. Very good points, Joe. It's, it is I don't want to call it a logical conclusion, but, given what happened in Dubai and how that did begin to change how people with top horses in the U.S. thought about their campaigns and what they were going to do with their best horses at certain times of the year. For the Saudis to throw that amount of money at it, it's disappointing to me, because there was a time, I think back wistfully, when there was some reasonable correlation between the size of purses and the quality of fields that one could expect. And, that was, I admit, on paper, a very interesting race. The Japanese are making waves internationally. And even if they didn't run so well in that race, it was it was a very interesting race to handicap. And I share your pleasure that you derived from the winner. And I know we're not alone. A lot of people were happy to see it. For the connections and smaller connections, it gets to be very boring to see the usual suspects up there. But look, I mean, really, 20 million. I mean, would they not have shown up for 10 million? I mean,
right.
It's and I'd like to. This is a tangent. We don't need to go off on it for more than a few seconds. But I remember a long time ago when there was the Blood Horse publishing, as they still do, along with many other types of statistics, the standings of stallions based on progeny earnings. And it was, one of my early light bulb moments as I was starting to get interested in breeding back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. I became interested in it and I wanted to soak up what I could. And, I was looking at these lists, and one day, I wish I had saved it. I'll go on to eBay and find the appropriate blood horse, but appropriate dated vintage blood horse. But one day I was looking at the list, and I don't remember if he was first or second, but right up there with Danzig and Northern Dancer and maybe Mr. Prospect. This was this was a big time breeding. I mean, there were tremendous influences at stud those days. If not on top, maybe second in the standings was old Bob Bowers. Now, a lot of people are not going to recognize the name old Bob Bowers because without one horse,
right?
no one would ever have remembered him. He was, I think he stood in Michigan. Anyhow, he was the sire of John Henry, who was a great racehorse and a pleasure to watch. I saw him race in the Arlington Million several times and so on. So that was an illustration to me of how distorted that sort of list could become. So, of course, the reason I mention it now is because Mineshaft, the sire of the winner of the Saudi Cup, is suddenly going to be on that list. Not just the obvious leading sire right now, but even at the end of the year, he may be second to Into Mischief or whatever. He'll be right up there because of one race. So that's it. It's just one illustration of how that kind of money does distort our understanding of what's happening in the game.